It's September 20th, and we're going to finish up assignment D, which was supposed to cover doors and windows, and we just ran out of time last week. So some of you have been working on and getting the windows in, and that's great. I know some of you had a couple questions, and I may have clarified them, but I want to just go through it kind of from start to finish, and then if there are any dangling questions, I can kind of get those cleared up again. So we're going to start on page 3, and we're going to load the window families. And then there will be some of these that we'll have to make a new window type. Unfortunately, there may not be as many as I meant to, because I may have left 1 or 2 types in there already created for you. And then to create the windows, you can place them in plan. You can place them in an elevation view, but it's easier to place them in plan and then go to the elevation and make sure that the height, head height and the sill height are where they should be. And then there's going to be another little caveat I'm going to go over, and that is what happens with high windows when they're up above the level that you're cutting your floor plan. So let's go ahead and load all the window types. We go to Insert, Load Family. And we want to use this Merrimack shortcut on the lower left to get to, and that takes us to this folder here. T Architecture Revit Content 2012, St. Louis Community College, Merrimack Libraries, U.S. Imperial, Windows. And I've got 4 windows. That one that says for RCPs, we don't really need. So let's just grab the casement window, the picture window that just doesn't say RCPs, and then the double hung window. Now on the first floor, there are nothing but picture windows, I believe. And then when we get up to the second floor, you'll be using double hungs. And then the casement window we're actually going to use in the addition, which we'll do hopefully next week in assignment F, where we build onto the back of the house with our new 1-story addition. So I'm going to go ahead and load all those into my project.
You already load them to delete the other one, possibly window?
It depends. If you've used it by accident, I'll show what happens if you try to delete it. So let's just pretend, for the sake of argument, that I placed one of the windows that I didn't mean to leave out there, like this, a 36 by 84 type. So if you tried to delete this family by right-click delete, it's going to warn you that you're about to delete the family, all of its types and instances, and there is one instance that will be deleted. So if you're okay with that, you can just say okay, and then you have to put it back in. Otherwise, you could go in and select, and I forgot to turn off tagging on placement. You could select that and change it from the RCP version to the one that doesn't say RCP. They should have the same types, 36 by 84. Then when I delete that family, it's not going to give me any warning because I'm not affecting anything that's already been built. I'm just taking away that family from my project. Okay, so let's start with the 60 by 86 windows on the front of the building. So those are window picture, single, and it has a brick header and a brick sill that are built into the window, kind of like you might have noticed before with our front and back exterior doors. There's a header that's built into the door. So this will be the same for the windows. So I'm going to grab the 36 by 84 type. Now I can just drag it out onto the screen to initiate the window command, and then I can look and see that I've got all these various instance parameters set. Remember, type parameters are properties of the actual window type. So if I place 4 of these 36 by 84 window types, they will that type, all 4 of those instances will be the same height, the same width, and other details that are type related. But I can have each one of them at a different head and sill height. So the head and sill are always going to be measured the same distance apart because the height of the window doesn't change if I move it up or down. So there's 2 properties that will change simultaneously. I'm just going to go ahead and change the head height here to the value I called out on the handout, which is 7'5". Now when I place a window with that setting, and if I hover, you remember you want to hover over the outside face of the wall so the window won't be inside out. And I know I saw a couple of you that had them, a few of the windows were inside out, so you saw a white window stool trim facing on the outside of the house, and it was as simple as selecting it and space barring it to flip it. But to get it right in the beginning, I'm just going to go ahead and place it correctly. And I forgot this tag on placement. I always do that. So click that button while you're in the window command, and that way no more of your windows will have window tags as you're placing them. But the first one already had a tag. I'm going to change my scale to 1/4 inch so I can see the text in the tags better. So I can delete that window tag because I'm not going to have you put window tags in for a while, if at all, in this class. So now I can put a dimension to the window just like I've done walls to walls, but I'll go wall to window this time, DI, from face of wall to center line of window. And I eyeballed it. It ended up being pretty close to the 8 feet it was supposed to be. So I select the window, click on the text of the dimension, and make it an even 8. And close it. Now I didn't use the dimension that has the little CL on my handout. You can, but I think it's a little busy looking to do that, so I'm going to change it to the other dimension style, the dimension type, which is called linear 3/32 aerial, with the word center line, which means that when you stretch that little line that's attached to the center of the window, it'll show a dash dot pattern like that, or a long dash, short dash pattern to indicate it's a center line, but I don't really think you need the CL everywhere you've got a window. I think it's clear enough from that.
So that's the one linear dimension style, linear 3/32 aerial center line,
Yes.
but I'm still getting a little center line thing from.
And you're using the one that spells out the word center line? Okay. Then edit the type, and where it says center line symbol, change that to none. And then you shouldn't see the CL there. For those of you who are watching after the fact, Andrew was asking, he was getting the CL even though he was using the right dimension type. Did that work?
Yep.
Okay. So now I'm going to put a dimension on the other side, DI, east face of that wall to center line of that window, drop it down. Now I really should pick the other dimension style as I'm placing them, and that way I won't have to change it back again. And run it through, select the window, not the dimension, to move the window, 8, and hit enter. Now let's look at it in the south elevation. So I go to elevations, building elevation, existing south, and well, that window looks awfully tall and narrow. I think it's just the aspect ratio of this monitor.
You got 66/86, and then you got a 36/84 value.
Okay, so I picked the wrong one. No wonder it looks so long and narrow. Okay, and one more thing that happens with these windows I built. Notice how there's kind of air blowing around them. There's a brick mold, and when I built it, I thought, okay, I'll make it so that when you go to coarse level of detail, you don't see the whole thing, and when you go to fine, you see everything. Go ahead and change all your elevations to fine level of detail, and that way you won't be missing the glass and the brick mold. Really, I should go back and just change it so that the window looks the same at all levels of detail. So Andrew caught the fact that I picked the wrong window type, so I'll just go back in here and pick the 60/86, which I don't have. So there are two ways I could make that new type. But I can do it, either way I'm doing it right here in the project. I don't have to open up the window family to change to a new type. So I'm going to go down in my browser and look for windows. And I see here's the family. And indeed I don't have a 60/86. So I can duplicate one of the other ones. I've got 36/84, which is close. And if I do it that way, then I can't just say, okay, there's the new type. I'm going to drag it out and apply it to that existing window. So the second way to make a new type is just to grab one that's already there and say, I want that to be a different type, and I don't have it yet. So you say Edit Type, and you look on the list to make sure there's not what you want, and then you just pick one and duplicate it. And so then the new name is going to be 60 inches by 86 inches, 36 by 84. But I have to remember to go in and change the actual dimensions. And some of you noticed on some of these doors and windows there's a lot of dimensions in the type properties. The ones I listed under constraints are kind of ones that you probably don't need to change from window to window. So you can collapse that and just go down to ones under dimensions. Unfortunately, this particular family, I should have put a bunch more of those under constraints instead of dimensions. So you have to hunt through the list until you see just plain width, and that should be 5 foot 1 1/8. And then height should be 86 inches, well, 7 foot 2 1/2, so it's really 86 1/2. So 7, 2, space 1/2. And now, because I got there by selecting this window and going in and editing the type and duplicating and changing it, when I say OK, it replaces the one I selected with the new type that I just made. So in this particular instance, that I think is a little quicker than using the browser to make the new type. Now, let's double check and make sure that the head height is still what it should be. Well, when I change the height of the window to a new type, it doesn't necessarily say, oh, I'm going to keep the head height constant and go down. It kind of recentered the window. It probably added 2 1/4 up and 2 1/4 down, and that's how it got to 7 foot 7 3/4, and not, yeah, 5 1/4 plus 2 1/2 or something. Anyway, I'm just going to retype the head height in as what I want it, which is 7 5 1/4. And so now, and if you look closely, you'll notice that I picked that odd dimension because I like to course things out to masonry brick coursing. So the top of this soldier course lines up with a brick joint, and the bottom of the rowlock sill lines up with a brick joint, so the mason doesn't have to cut any chunks of brick to fill in. I hate that. If you look at windows in a brick wall, a lot of times you'll see that they didn't work the dimensions out, so you'll see a little sliver of brick underneath those because they had to cut it, and it just, to me, that looks sloppy and ugly. So that's why I use those dimensions. Okay, so now I need to change that window to match that other one. I could select it, and I could go up here and look for the new type, but there's a tool I probably haven't shown you in here yet, and it is on the Modify tab, and it's called Match Type Properties. Shortcut is MA. That's one that I don't use that much, and I should get used to using that shortcut. So, Match Properties, Match Type Properties says if you use that, it's kind of like if you use Photoshop. I think there's an eyedropper command. You can suck up a color and paint it down. So you hit that. I say I want to match this type, so I pick that first, and then I say I want it to be in that one. And so it changes that window to match this one. And hopefully it didn't mess up my head height, but it looks like it might have for some reason. So yeah, the head height is now changed to 7 7 3/4. So again, you can't unfortunately assume that the head heights will stay put when you change the height of a window. Now, if you get lazy like me and you don't like to have to read a number and then type the number, and you're prone to typos if you're like me, I like to say, okay, that one's correct. So I'm just going to highlight that number and do a Control-C to copy that. Then I can go over to this window and highlight the head height and just paste Control-V on top of it. That way I get the same number without any typographic errors. And that's fixed. Any questions about that? Another thing I could do, I'm going to back up here and undo with Control-Z. So notice here how the top of that window does not line up with the top of this window at this point. You could do the Align button or Align command. I like to use the shortcut AL, but there's the button on Modify. And remember, with Align, you pick what you're lining up with first, which is the top of that brick soldier course. And then I pick the one I'm moving, which is the top of that brick soldier course. If everything worked right, that number here should match that one, which it does. So 2 ways of skinning the cat. They both work. The third way you could do is just to put a dimension from the floor line to some point on the window, like the top there. And you'll see that works out to 8 foot 8 and a 16th. Really, that value should be 7 foot 5 and 3/16 if you really want to get nitpicky. So if I was to make that there, or I could just select a window and change that to 8 foot 8, which is a masonry dimension. For those of you who aren't architects and haven't worked with masonry, normally a standard brick is there 3 courses of brick for every 8 inches high. So 8 foot 8 is a multiple of 8 inches, which means I get an even number, a complete number of bricks. I don't get any chunks of partial bricks in that. And that's actually 12 plus 1 is 13 times 3. No. 12, there's 3 bricks for every 8 inches, so 8 feet would have 36 actual courses, plus another 3 is 39 courses of brick if I was to count those. Anyway, let's go on to our plan and put in some other windows here. So we've got more 60 by 86ers on the back of the house, and they're not at the same distance in from the sides. Well, there's one in the back. But with a window, I could just mirror that from the front wall to the back wall as long as I know where the midpoint is to mirror it about. So I'm going to try that. I'm going to select that window, and then I'm going to hit mirror, pick axis, and I'll show you what happens if I pick the wrong axis, like this. It says can't place inserts outside of hosts. So what was happening is I was trying to mirror that, and I picked this as my axis, and so it put the new one up somewhere up in here, which had no wall to attach to, so it vaporized. So if I'm more careful this time, select it and say I'm going to mirror, pick axis, and pick the reference plane that's the center line, then it works because the mirror image of that about that line hits right on top of that wall, and it doesn't disappear into space. These messages may be kind of hard to understand, but if you stop and read them, you can usually figure out what went wrong. It's just that they're not very clearly worded sometimes, and they don't scream at you. They usually kind of hide in the corner in a little box, and if you go on to the next click, then they're gone. So try to take the time to read those messages until you get used to what they're talking about. Then I'm going to go DI, place that dimension, and adjust that to 7 foot 4. And then I'm going to extend this little node through the center of the window. And since I'm done with the assignment A, I could go back and delete those dimensions now, because we only put those in for assignment A. And after all, we're in a working view, right? We're in the view work L1 existing architectural. So this view will never be put on a sheet to plot, so it doesn't matter what dimensions I kind of leave in there. Just for my purposes of getting things so that I know I have them in the right place. So you can, yeah. If they're not getting in your way, there's no problem with leaving them on. What I do want is when you turn in assignment D, make sure you have dimensions attached to your windows and doors where I have it in the handout. That way I can grade it and say, oh yeah, that's 7 foot 4. She's got the dimension going to that window. And then, let's see, we've got some windows on the side, and then we've got this big guy here. So let's go ahead and put in that big window. It's 120 by 74. And I don't know if I have that type in here, so let's take a look. Yep, I do. And it's already, its width is 10 foot 1 1/8, and its height is 6 foot 2 1/2, which is correct. So the only thing I have to get right when I'm placing it is the head height. And if you look closely at this handout, I've got all the first 4 windows head height at 7 foot 5 1/4, which is how you would normally want it. You want them to line up across the outside of the building. Doesn't always happen depending on who built the house and if it was really designed. So let's go down to the 120 by 74. I'm just going to drag it out there, place it, make sure I'm hovering over the outside instead of the inside. Click it down, escape, escape. And I'm going to dimension, well, I didn't even give you a dimension on that, did I? When we get to assignment F, I'm going to tell you what that dimension should be. Let me look it up, though, so that I can go ahead and show you now. Well, I'll get to that later. I don't have that handout downloaded. So, then we can go to this back window at the kitchen, which is 96 by 54. That's a picture window family also. 8'0" by 4'6". And I'll give you a kind of a forewarning. When we get to assignment G, when we place the cabinets in the countertop, we're going to run into a conflict. And so we're going to put this window where I say, but eventually we're going to find that the sill height of that window is going to be low enough that it encroaches on the backsplash of the countertop. And so we're going to have you go back and revise that and fix it. Because it's a good example of the kind of things you might run across when you're designing a building and you find out things don't quite fit, then you go back and you resolve it. And it's all by virtue of the fact that it's a 3D model you're dealing with that you're able to fix those things rather than just a bunch of two-dimensional drafted drawings. It's much easier to overlook things when you don't have a 3D model. So I'm going to duplicate the 36 by 84. I'm going to do this out of the browser. So right-click Duplicate. And then I'm going to rename the new one that has the space 2 to say 96 inch by 54 inch. I have to make sure that its size matches what I set it. So we'll scroll down the dimensions here and change the width to 8 feet, to 46, and OK. Now I'll just drag that out on the screen to kick into the window command using this family and type that I just made. Hover over the outside, click it down. Now I didn't pay attention to my sill and head height before I placed it, so I probably ended up with a head height just under 5 feet. So let's look at our back elevation, which would be existing north elevation.
No, that's a second floor window.
Did I use a... Oh, I'm looking at the second floor page. No wonder. Thanks. See, I got to keep you all on your toes. I got to make some mistakes now and then. Yeah. Well, it's there when I get ready to do it the second floor. So let's go back to plan here. And that should have been a 48 by 44 in the kitchen downstairs. So let's see if I have that. I don't think I do. So I'll go ahead and duplicate the 36 by 36. It doesn't really matter which one you duplicate, but if there's one that has at least the width or the height right, it saves a little bit of work. So this will be 48 inch by 44 inch. And I'll double click, change the width to 4 0 3/8. So I'm just going to change the 3 to a 4 and hit enter. And the height should be 3'8" instead of 3 feet, so 3 space 8. And OK. Drag it out there, and this time I'm going to set the head height in its instance parameters before I place it, 7, 5, 3/4. And hover over the outside, drop it down, and we got something funky going on here. So, did anybody else go this far and you got a funny looking window back there?
Yeah.
Okay.
We need to read further down the sheet.
Okay. And did you figure out what the answer was?
It's the plan view, the localized plan view.
Right. And normally when you cut a plan, it's set to 4 feet above the floor. And when you think about it, if the head height is 7'5" and a fraction, and the window is 4 feet high, no, 3 feet 8, then if you subtract 3'8" from 7'5", you get about what? Yeah, it's just shy of 4 feet, 3'9". And if we're cutting 4 feet off the floor and the bottom of the window is 3'9", then we're probably not cutting through the glass, we're cutting through something lower than that. So we don't miss the window, we just don't see it properly drawn. And we happen to have a building section cut through here, so let's look at our building section. Everything looks good in section, but let's run a dimension string up here. DI from the level. And if I go to there, there's my 3'9" and a fraction. So if I put a reference plane, just for the sake of argument here, and dimension to that and make it 4 feet. So that plan is cutting right through that sill, and that's no wonder it looks so funny looking. So we're going to solve that in a minute, but I'm going to create another problem to solve at the same time, and that is these side windows. And those are 36 by 36, so they're small, square, 3-foot windows. So if I put them at a normal sill height of 2.5 feet, then the top of the window is going to be kind of low. But if you're used to some of these neighborhoods in St. Louis where you have the brick houses fairly closely spaced, and the side windows, because they're going to be looking at their neighbor, are up higher, so you're not staring in through your neighbor's window. And that explains why these windows are going to do funky things. Let's go ahead and place one of them. Drag it out there, 36 by 36. I'm going to go ahead and set the head height to 7, 5 1/4 because we want them all to line up on the outside of the house. And place it. Bam, it's gone. But if I hover around where I placed it, it's like it's invisible. It's there, I can select it, but why don't I see it? Well, it's because we're cutting at 4 feet, but the window I placed, if it's 3 feet high, 7'5" minus 3 is 4'5". So we're now cutting 5 1/4 inches below the bottom of the window. So that's why we don't see it. So the solution to that is we've got to deal with this cut plane height, because 4 feet isn't going to cut it, no pun intended, to get through the window. So if we raised our cut plane height everywhere, what would we do? Everybody remember the view property we used for that? Close. It's called view range, which has a depth and a height, cutting plane height and everything. So if we did that, we could just go to the view properties here and say edit view range and raise that up from 4 feet to, say, 6 feet and say OK. Now we see that window. Problem is, if our course had just a little bit more time, I would have put the chimney and fireplace in here that goes in between those windows, which was the case with the real house. And if you think about a fireplace, the mantle is probably going to be lower than 4 feet, which means if you cut your plan at 4 feet, you'd be seeing a mantle instead of cutting through the firebox. Yeah. If you want to, yeah. I'll give you a point or two if you want to build your own fireplace and chimney. I'll give you a warning, though. It's kind of tricky to come up with a fireplace. I went to the view properties. Let me just undo it here. So I looked in the view properties. And make sure nothing's selected when you go to view properties, because otherwise you'll be getting properties of a wall. So if I have this wall selected, it doesn't say floor plan, it says wall. But I'll show you a little bitty sneaky trick here. See where it says walls 1? Even though that wall is selected, I could go and say, I want to get back to the view properties without deselecting the wall. So now I'm back to view properties. But in general, I say, let's escape, deselect it. And then I'm looking through view properties. Scroll all the way down. And I always, when I'm looking for view range, I just jam that thing to the bottom and look for the last edit button right there. And I change the cut plane height from 4 feet to 6 feet so that we're cutting everything 6 feet off the floor. But the problem with doing that is it would mean then we're missing this fireplace entirely. And there might be other things in the house that we want to be cutting at 4 feet. So there's a good reason why you generally keep everything at 4 feet. So what we need is a tool that would allow us to cut just in certain locations up a little higher, like the kitchen window and these windows on the side. So that's something Revit calls a plan region. And we get to that through the View tab of the ribbon. And on this Create panel, where it says Plan Views, you'll see Plan Region. So go down and click that. And what it is you're going to outline an area of the plan and say, here, I want to change the view range. So a plan region is a sketch, kind of like when we sketched our floor and our roof. And I'm just going to do a simple rectangle. I'm going to start with the one at the around that window. So I'm going to kind of eyeball a rectangle around where I know that window should be. And I can either wait till I finish the sketch, or I can go over here to the properties while I'm sketching and say, the thing I'm sketching only has one property. It's the view range. So I'm going to edit the view range of that little rectangular plane region and say, I want to cut that 6 feet off the floor instead of 4. So I change the cut plane to 6 feet above the first floor. Then when I finish my sketch, just like we did with floors, if I get the rectangle in the right spot, which I just kind of barely missed a little bit. I can stretch it. Then it shows the window. So I've locally changed the view range just in that outlined area. And then I could mirror that window because it's 6 feet on either side. Let's put a dimension and get it to 6 feet first. Off by 11 inches here, so let's move it. And then I'm going to select and mirror the window. It disappeared like I expected it to. So now I could just copy that, or I could even just do the same thing and select that little plan region and mirror that, about the same reference plane. Yeah, this should be the same way. That's that kitchen window. So I'm going to just create another plan region exactly the same way. Plan region. And I'm going to sketch it with a 2-point rectangle because that's the quickest way to do a rectangle. Go in and edit the view range and raise it. 5 feet is probably high enough for that one because we're already cutting the bottom part of the window. And then finish. That solves that. And then we've got 2 more of these windows, so I'm going to take that guy. I like to use mirror because it saves time. I want to make sure that I've got my head height right. So you want to double check yourself. But because I mirrored that one, it made the new one the same head height as the one I mirrored. So that's a good technique to not have to go back and make sure everything's the same. But I recommend checking your 3D every so often because a lot of things people get wrong on this assignment when they turn it in is their windows on the side are down low and they don't realize, oh, it looks fine in plan. Well, you can't tell how high it is until you look at it in 3D or on your west elevation. So if you eyeball it here in 3D, you can tell, yeah, it looks like the head of that window lines up with the head of that window. And that's a good way to double check. Just like in the first one where we double checked to make sure the plaster wasn't on the outside of the building. And I'm going to mirror that in the other direction, knowing that it's not going to be the right dimension, but let's go ahead and mirror that plan region again. I'm getting into mirroring tonight. And then I'm going to dimension to that one, because it should actually be closer to the front. And that should be 4'8". And I'm going to scoosh that whole plan region down. And then I'm going to copy that window 10 feet to the north. So I'm going to use the copy button. Select the window, hit copy. Say, okay, from a point in space directly 10 feet north. So I'm moving that direction. Type 10 and hit enter. That window's there, but I can't see it. So now I'm going to be a little tricky. Now, remember when you sketched the floor, if you wanted to change the boundary of the floor, you could select it and say edit boundary. And I could move that line up here like that. And then finish. But in the case of these plan regions, I'm going to undo that. You can just select it, and you'll see that you get these grips, or shape handles as they're called. I can just drag the shape handle on the side of that rectangle and go up to there. So I used 1 plan region on that side of the building and 2 on the other side. And I've got it shown in the handout that way. 1 there, 1 there, 1 there, and 1 back on the kitchen window. So I think I've got all the windows that were prescribed. Any questions about that? This is just first floor windows, by the way. So it sounds like a lot of you have tried it, and the ones who haven't, you're going to have to digest, make sure you can do it. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a couple comments about the second floor, and then we'll go on to this assignment. Yeah, Dan? They show up as a green dashed line, but you won't see that when you plot. So when I did this handout, because I wanted to plot this out of Revit, I couldn't get those to plot because they drop away. So I had to draw like a red dashed line on top of the actual plan region just to do the handout. That's so I could show you what to do, but you don't want to see that in your final product. All right, so I'm going to save what I have, if I already done that. I'm going to go ahead and stop this. Well, no, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the basement and second floor. Okay, so at the basement level, it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And these doors are 30 by 80. Again, they're going to swing 45 degrees. That guy is the exterior in-swing flush door. Now notice how the door type is 84 high. Tonight, when we put in assignment E, we're going to put pipe columns in the basement and a beam to hold up the first floor. And when we do that, we're going to find that the beam is going to interfere with the head height of that door. So we can go back and say, okay, I can solve that one of two ways, and I'll talk about that when we get there. This is a garage overhead sectional door there that you need to put in for. At this point, if you do it as part of assignment D, you'll get extra credit for it. But by the time we get to the end of the semester, you'll need to have all that in there to get regular full credit for your final assignment. So the extra credit for this part is essentially for doing it now instead of waiting and doing it by the end of the semester. And then level 2 windows and doors. Here's the level 2 doors. And I've called out the types. Most of these are 28 by 80. There's a 32 by 80. If there are any spots in these walls where I don't have a dimension, like right here I said equal, equal, and equal, equal. And then I didn't dimension that. So the depth here I called out as 3'4" there. So if I didn't call these others out, just pick a number that's a nice round dimension, like 3 feet. If you know that that door is 28 by 80, and even though that's labeled, yeah. So it's got to be, eyeball it as maybe 30 plus 4, 34, 36 inches wide, roughly. And then we've got a double door there and a double door here. Now, I had a question from a couple of you before class tonight. Jerome, I think that this had plaster on the back, or was it Joe, I think? Yeah, and you were cutting that door in there, and with the plaster, remember at the first floor we had that special door that went through the plaster and the brick together. I haven't made a double door for the second floor that does that. So the way I'm approaching it is I'm saying, well, let's treat this is actually a sunroom on the second floor. And I'm saying, let's treat that as a semi-finished room out there. So even though you're going to have plaster on these 3 walls, we'll just kind of say that's an unfinished brick wall on that side. And that way the door will go all the way through the wall, and its jamb will automatically say I'm as deep as that one wall. And I guess that's about it. We've got on these windows, these are picture windows on the back too, but then on the sides, we've got double hung windows on the corner and on the east side. And that's a picture window on the front again. That is a double hung there and there. And then this guy in the front of the bathroom up there is a picture window 3 foot by 4 foot. So it's got a sill height of a little below 3 feet. You know, if I had it to do over, I probably would use a 36 by 36 window there. And that way the sill height would be higher so that you're not staring out of the bathroom window as you step out of the bathtub or whatever. Anyway, I'm going to let you do that part on your own. And then I'm going to go ahead and close this recording for assignment D. CBE, this is session